My name is Evelyn Parker, and for 3 weeks, the people who said they loved me were slowly killing me. I didn't know it at first, not when I collapsed at our backyard barbecue in Plano after drinking the margarita my mother-in-law made. Not when the ER doctors at Baylor Dallas ran every test and found nothing. Not even when my husband Mark sat by my hospital bed, holding my hand and whispering that everything would be okay. I believed him. I trusted him. I thanked him for taking care of me. Then Nurse Jenna slipped me a note on a Tuesday night, and everything I thought I knew shattered in 30 seconds. "Ms. Parker, you dropped this," she said too loudly, pressing a folded piece of paper into my palm before adjusting my IV. Her hand was shaking. I didn't drop anything, and she knew it. The note was written in neat block letters. "You're not sick. They're poisoning you. Do not eat or drink anything they bring." I sat there in that fluorescent hospital room, listening to the heart monitor beep, staring at those words. Suddenly, every mystery symptom snapped into place. The dizziness after Mark's smoothies, the vomiting after Carol's casseroles, the weakness that only came after family visits. The doctors kept saying my labs were clean. No tumor, no stroke, nothing that explained why I kept collapsing. But they didn't know what I knew. I wasn't just a tired suburban wife in a hospital bed. Last year, I sold my chain of physical therapy clinics and donated $5 million to this hospital. I sit on the foundation board. My attorney is also the hospital's outside counsel. And while Mark was planning my funeral, I was planning something else entirely. This is one of those toxic family stories where the victim refuses to stay a victim. It was a Tuesday night in Dallas when my life split into before and after. The hospital windows reflected nothing but fluorescent ghosts and the dim glow of the parking lot below. I'd been admitted for observation 3 days earlier after another collapse, and the doctors were running out of theories. Mark had just visited. He brought a thermos of homemade bone broth that his mother, Carol, swore would fix everything. He sat on the edge of my bed, stroking my hair, insisting I drink it while it was still warm. "You need to keep your strength up, honey," he said. His voice was gentle. His eyes were tired. He looked like a man who'd been sleeping in waiting rooms and worrying himself sick. I drank half the cup to make him happy. It tasted like celery and something bitter I couldn't place. Within minutes, my stomach turned. I felt the familiar wave of nausea rising. Mark kissed my forehead and promised to come back in the morning. The moment the door closed behind him, I heard the quick squeak of rubber soles on linoleum. Nurse Jenna appeared in the doorway, her face tight with something I couldn't read. "Ms. Parker, you dropped this," she said, louder than necessary. She crossed the room quickly and pressed something into my palm while pretending to adjust the IV line in my arm. I looked down. A folded piece of paper. My heart started pounding before I even opened it. The handwriting was careful, deliberate, printed in block letters like someone afraid their cursive might be recognized. "You're not sick. They're poisoning you. Do not eat or drink anything they bring." I stared at those words until they blurred. The heart monitor beeped steadily. The air conditioner hummed. Somewhere down the hall, someone called for a nurse, and in my hand, the paper felt heavier than anything I'd ever held. Jenna was gone. The room was silent except for the machines keeping track of my failing body. I thought about the barbecue 3 weeks ago. The margarita, Carol, made just for me. How I'd praised the taste before the world tilted sideways. I thought about Mark's daily smoothies, delivered with a kiss. The casseroles that appeared in our fridge with sticky notes that said, "Love you, sweetheart." Every single time I got worse, the doctors kept using the same phrase in their notes. Symptoms out of proportion to labs. It meant my body was acting like it was dying, but the tests showed nothing that should be killing me. No cancer, no infection, no autoimmune disease, just a mystery illness that made less sense with every passing day. I looked at the half-empty thermos on my bedside table. The broth inside had already started to congeal. I thought about pouring it down the sink. Instead, I left it exactly where it was. If Jenna was right, that cup wasn't food, it was evidence. And if she was wrong, I was about to destroy my marriage over the paranoid suspicions of a nurse I barely knew. But the thing is, I didn't think she was wrong. Deep down, in the part of me that had been whispering warnings I refused to hear, I knew she was telling the truth. The people I loved most in the world were trying to kill me, and I had been making it easy. It started on a Sunday in late June. Perfect Texas weather, blue sky, temperature just right, the kind of afternoon that makes you forget how brutal the summer heat can get. Mark and I were hosting a barbecue at our house in Plano, nothing fancy, just neighbors, a few friends from church, his mother Carol, and her boyfriend Frank. I'd been working 60-hour weeks at my physical therapy clinics, trying to finalize a buyout deal that had been in negotiation for months. I was tired, sure, but I felt good, strong, healthy. Carol arrived early with a cooler full of drinks. She'd been on this health kick lately, talking endlessly about clean eating and detox smoothies. She pulled me aside in the kitchen and handed me a red Solo cup filled with something green and slushy. Special margarita, she said, smiling that warm, mother-in-law smile I'd grown to trust over 5 years of marriage. No sugar, no carbs. Perfect for that cleanse you mentioned. I hadn't mentioned a cleanse, but I took the cup anyway and drank half of it while she watched. It tasted like lime and something herbal I couldn't identify. I told her it was delicious. She looked pleased. 20 minutes later, I was on the grass, unable to stand. The world spun like I'd been drinking for hours. My stomach cramped so violently I thought something inside me had ruptured. I heard Mark shouting my name. Someone called 911. Carol stood over me, hand pressed to her mouth, eyes wide with what looked like genuine horror. The ambulance took me to Baylor, Dallas. By the time we arrived, my heart rate was through the roof and I was vomiting bile. The ER team ran scans, drew blood, checked for stroke symptoms. Everything came back normal. My brain was fine, my heart was fine, my organs were fine. But I wasn't fine. I felt like I was dying. They admitted me for observation. Mark stayed by my side the entire night, holding my hand, stroking my hair. When I apologized for ruining the party, he shushed me gently. "Don't be ridiculous," he said. You've been working yourself to death. Your body is telling you to slow down." I believed him. I always believed him. That's what wives do, right? That's what love looks like. Trust, faith, surrender. Carol visited the next morning with flowers and a Tupperware container of homemade chicken soup. She set it on the bedside table and squeezed my hand. "You scared us, sweetie," she said. Her voice was soft, motherly. "But you're going to be okay, we'll make sure of it." I ate the soup that afternoon. By evening, I was vomiting again. The nurses looked concerned, but couldn't explain it. My labs were still clean. My vitals were stable. There was no medical reason for me to be this sick. Mark brought me a smoothie the next day. Organic greens, he said, full of nutrients. I drank it to make him happy. Within an hour, the dizziness came back, worse than before. The pattern repeated itself for 2 weeks. I'd start to feel better. They'd visit, they'd bring food, I'd crash. And every time, they looked so worried, so heartbroken, so devoted. The doctors started talking about stress-induced illness, psychosomatic symptoms. One even suggested I see a psychiatrist. I started to wonder if I was losing my mind, if maybe the pressure of selling my business had broken something inside me that medicine couldn't fix. But the truth was simpler than that, and so much worse. The hospital became my second home. I was discharged twice, only to be readmitted within days. Each time, the same cycle played out like a script neither of us had written, but both of us followed perfectly. I'd wake up feeling slightly better, stronger, almost normal. Then Mark would arrive with breakfast, a smoothie in a glass bottle with a handwritten label. All natural ingredients, he'd say. Spinach, banana, almond butter, chia seeds. He'd watch me drink it, smiling encouragement, telling me how proud he was of how hard I was fighting. Carol would show up in the afternoon with lunch, keto casseroles in glass containers with her signature floral labels. She'd sit beside my bed, talking about church activities and neighborhood gossip, making sure I finished every bite before she left. By evening, I'd be too weak to lift my head. My pulse would race, my vision would blur, the nurses would page doctors, tests would be ordered, results would come back inconclusive. Mark started screening my phone calls. He'd intercept texts from friends asking how I was doing. He told everyone I was too weak to talk, too sick to have visitors outside immediate family. He made it sound like protection, like love. I let him. Because what else was I supposed to think? My husband was sacrificing everything to take care of me. His mother was cooking meals and praying over me. They looked exhausted, terrified, heartbroken. I became smaller in that hospital bed. Not just physically, though I'd lost 15 pounds. I became smaller in every way that mattered. My voice got quieter, my opinions mattered less. My instincts, the ones that had built a multi-million-dollar business, seemed to disappear under the weight of my own failing body. One afternoon, Mark brought his laptop to my room. He needed me to sign some paperwork, he said. Insurance stuff. Power of attorney updates, just in case. His voice cracked when he said those last two words, just in case. I signed everything he put in front of me. I didn't read it carefully. I trusted him. That's what you do when someone holds your hand through the worst moments of your life. You trust them. Carol posted about me on Facebook. Prayer requests. Updates on my condition. Photos of her sitting beside my bed, holding my hand, eyes closed in prayer. The comments poured in. So many people praying for me. So many people calling her a saint. And she was, wasn't she? Caring for her sick daughter-in-law, bringing meals, spending hours at the hospital, sacrificing her own comfort for someone else's suffering. Except for one thing. Every time they fed me, I got worse. Every single time. And somewhere deep in my brain, underneath the exhaustion and the pain and the fog of whatever was in my system, a small voice kept whispering that something was wrong. I ignored it. Because the alternative was too horrible to consider. The alternative meant that the people who kissed my forehead and called me sweetheart were the same people who were making me sick. The alternative meant I was sleeping in a room with open doors, drinking poison from the hands of people I loved. And if that was true, if Nurse Jenna's note was right, then I'd been dying slowly while thanking them for caring. The morning after I read Jenna's note, I didn't touch the breakfast Mark brought. I told him my stomach was upset. He looked concerned, almost hurt, but he didn't push. The moment he left, I buzzed for Jenna. She came quickly, closing the door behind her. Her face was pale, her jaw tight. She looked like someone who'd just stepped off a cliff and was waiting to see if she'd land or fall. You read it, she said, quietly. It wasn't a question. Tell me why you think they're poisoning me, I said. My voice was steadier than I expected. Tell me everything. Jenna pulled up a chair and sat down. She'd been watching my case since my first admission, she said. At first, she thought it was just strange. Labs that didn't match symptoms. Recovery that stalled every time family visited. Then she started paying closer attention. She noticed the timing. I'd stabilize overnight when I was alone. By morning, my vitals would improve. Then, visiting hours would start. And by evening, I'd crash again. She started documenting what they brought, the smoothies, the soups, the special teas. She pulled my chart one night and saw something that made her stop breathing. My blood work showed trace amounts of compounds that shouldn't be there. Not enough to kill me quickly, but enough to make me violently ill. Enough to make doctors think I had some mystery disease. I reported it to risk management, Jenna said. They didn't believe me at first, but then someone pulled your donor file. I felt something shift in my chest. A door I'd forgotten was locked, suddenly swinging open. Last year, I sold my chain of physical therapy clinics. The deal closed in November. 3 locations across the Dallas area, built from nothing over 12 years. The buyer paid $8 million. After taxes and fees, I walked away with enough money to retire at 42 if I wanted to. I didn't retire. But I did donate $5 million to Baylor Dallas. I funded a new rehabilitation wing. My name is on a plaque in the main lobby. I sit on the hospital foundation board. And my personal attorney, David Klein, also happens to be the hospital's outside counsel. When your name came up, Jenna said, people started listening because you're not just another patient. You're connected here. And if someone was poisoning you in our hospital, it's a liability issue. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Not fear, not anymore. Something sharper, something that felt like power waking up after a long sleep. What do we do? I asked. Jenna leaned forward. We prove it. We document everything. And we make sure that when they bring you food tomorrow, it doesn't end up in your stomach. It ends up in a lab. I thought about Mark's face when he insisted I finish the broth. The way Carol watched me eat her casseroles, smiling that patient smile. The insurance paperwork I'd signed without reading. The comments on her Facebook posts calling her a blessing. For 3 weeks I'd been a victim, a sick woman, a burden, someone who needed to be taken care of, someone who was slowly disappearing under the weight of her own mysterious illness. But I wasn't sick. I was being murdered. And the people trying to kill me had made one critical mistake. They'd assumed I was powerless. They'd assumed that because I was in a hospital bed, I'd stopped being Evelyn Parker, the woman who built a business empire from scratch. They were wrong. I looked at Jenna and felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Not hope, not relief, something harder, something that tasted like justice. Let's do it, I said. Let's prove exactly what they are. David Klein arrived at the hospital the next morning. He didn't come as my attorney. He came as a foundation board member conducting a routine visit. No one questioned it. No one thought twice about him sitting in my room, reviewing paperwork, asking quiet questions about my care. We met in a conference room after visiting hours. David, Jenna, a hospital administrator named Patricia, and someone from risk management whose name I immediately forgot because I was too focused on what came next. Patricia laid out the plan. They would install discrete cameras in my room, positioned to capture the food and drinks brought during visits. Security would monitor in real time. After each visit, if food was left behind, it would be collected immediately and sent to the toxicology lab. My blood would be drawn on a precise schedule to establish a timeline. We need your consent, Patricia said, looking at me carefully, and we need you to act normal. If they suspect we're watching, they'll stop, and we'll have nothing. Act normal. Smile at my husband. Thank my mother-in-law for her cooking. Pretend I didn't know that every meal might be laced with something meant to kill me. Slowly. I can do that, I said. The cameras went live that afternoon. Mark visited after work. He brought a green smoothie in a glass bottle, the same kind he'd been bringing for weeks. He sat on the edge of my bed and handed it to me, his face soft with concern. You look better today, he said. Color's coming back. I smiled, took the bottle, felt its weight in my hand. Every instinct in my body screamed to throw it across the room. Instead, I lifted it to my lips, pretended to drink, and set it back down. I'll finish it in a minute, I said, just feeling a little full right now. Mark nodded. He talked about work, about the bills, about how hard this had been on both of us. He held my hand. He looked tired, devoted, like a man carrying the weight of the world. He kissed my forehead before he left. The smoothie sat on my bedside table, innocuous and green and deadly. The moment the door closed, a security officer entered. She wore scrubs and carried a tray like she was collecting meal refuse. She bagged the smoothie, labeled it, and disappeared. 10 minutes later, a nurse drew my blood. Baseline sample, they called it. Evidence, I thought. Carol came the next day with soup. Chicken and rice, she said. Easy on the stomach. She watched me take the first spoonful, her eyes tracking the motion from bowl to mouth. I swallowed, smiled, told her it was delicious. She stayed for an hour, talking about everything and nothing. When she finally left, the soup went straight to the lab. Another blood draw. Another piece of the puzzle clicking into place. The results came back. 48 hours later. David called me from his office, his voice tight with something that sounded like controlled rage. Antifreeze in the smoothie, he said. Ethylene glycol. Not enough to kill you immediately, but enough to cause kidney damage, neurological symptoms, everything you've been experiencing. The soup had traces of benzodiazepines, sedatives, enough to make you weak, confused, compliant. I sat in that hospital bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling something crack open inside me. Not surprise, not shock. Just the cold, hard confirmation of something I'd already known but hadn't wanted to believe. "We have enough to bring in law enforcement," David said. "Dallas PD will want to interview you. Are you ready?" Was I ready? That felt like the wrong question. Ready implied choice. But this wasn't a choice anymore. This was survival. This was the moment I stopped being prey and became something else entirely. "Yes," I said. "I'm ready." Detective Sarah Martinez from Dallas PD arrived on a Thursday morning, dressed in plain clothes, carrying a folder that held my life in paper form. She sat in my hospital room with the door closed and laid out everything they'd found in 72 hours of investigation. It wasn't just the poisoning. That was the method. The why ran deeper and colder than I'd imagined. Mark had increased my life insurance policy 6 months ago. $2 million, with him as the sole beneficiary. I'd signed the paperwork during a weekend when we were refinancing the house. He'd slipped it into a stack of documents, telling me it was just part of the mortgage process. I'd signed without reading. He'd also added himself to my bank accounts, full access, transfer authority. He told me it was easier this way, in case something happened and bills needed to be paid. I'd thought it was practical, responsible, the kind of thing married couples do. David had pulled our financial records. Over the past 3 months, Mark had been moving money. Small amounts at first, a few thousand here and there, then larger transfers, 15,000, 20. He'd opened accounts in his name only, shifting assets slowly enough that I wouldn't notice if I checked balances. But I hadn't been checking. I'd been too sick, too weak, too focused on trying not to die, to notice my husband was preparing for exactly that. Detective Martinez slid another document across the hospital table. Printed emails between Mark and a real estate agent. He'd been inquiring about selling our house. Not someday. Not in the future. 3 weeks ago, while I was still alive. While he was still bringing me smoothies and kissing my forehead. "Your house is worth about $900,000, Martinez said. Combined with the life insurance, liquidating your assets, his inheritance would be close to $4 million. $4 million. That's what my life was worth. Not my love. Not our marriage. Not 5 years of building something I thought was real. Just a number, a payout, a prize at the end of a carefully orchestrated death." "What about Carol?" I asked. My voice sounded strange, distant, like it was coming from someone else. Martinez pulled out her phone and showed me screenshots of text messages. "Carol to a friend from their church group in Frisco. She's getting worse. I don't think she'll make it much longer. Then, 2 days later, Mark will finally be free when God calls her home." Another text, this one colder. "The doctors can't find anything wrong." Perfect. No one will question it. They'd been planning this, discussing it, praying over it probably, convincing themselves they were doing something righteous, that I was the obstacle, that my death was somehow God's will and their windfall. I thought about all the Facebook posts, the prayer requests, the photos of Carol sitting by my bedside, hand pressed over mine, eyes closed in false devotion. People had called her a saint in the comments. They'd praised her faith, her sacrifice, her love. She wasn't loving me. She was watching me die, and she was documenting it for sympathy and social proof. "We have enough to arrest them," Martinez said, "but we need your cooperation. We need you to be willing to testify, to go through the trial, to face them in court." I looked at her. This detective I'd just met, sitting in my hospital room, asking me if I was strong enough to drag my husband and his mother into a courtroom and make them answer for trying to erase me from existence. Was I strong enough? I'd built a business from nothing. I'd survived 3 weeks of systematic poisoning. I'd donated millions to this hospital and sat on boards and made decisions that affected hundreds of lives. Of course I was strong enough. The question wasn't about strength, it was about choice. And I'd already made mine the moment I read Jenna's note. "I'll testify," I said. "I'll do whatever it takes." Martinez nodded. She looked satisfied, almost relieved. Then she said the words I'd been waiting to hear since this nightmare started. "We're arresting them tomorrow morning here, at the hospital, before they have a chance to run. Tomorrow. One more day of pretending, one more day of letting them think they'd won, one more day before everything they'd built on my death collapsed around them. I could wait one more day." Friday morning arrived with the kind of false brightness that makes everything feel surreal. Mark showed up early, dressed in khakis and a polo shirt, carrying a duffel bag and a thermos. He looked happy, excited even. "They're discharging you today," he said, grinning. "You're coming home, Evie. Finally." Evie. He hadn't called me that in months. The nickname felt like a lie in his mouth now. Everything felt like a lie. Carol arrived an hour later with balloons and a bakery box. She'd bought cupcakes to celebrate, she said. She pulled out her phone and started filming. Facebook Live. Broadcasting my homecoming to everyone who'd been following my story. Everyone who thought she was a hero. "Look, everyone," she said into the camera, her voice bright. "Our girl is finally coming home. God is so good." I smiled for the camera, thanked her for the cupcakes, let her hug me while strangers on the internet left heart emojis and praise comments. I played the role they'd written for me. The grateful patient, the weak wife, the woman who'd barely survived. Mark handed me the thermos. "Celebration smoothie," he said. "Your favorite." I took it, felt its weight, looked at his face, searching for something. Guilt, hesitation, doubt. Anything that suggested the man I married was still in there somewhere. There was nothing, just the same warm smile, the same concerned eyes, the same practice performance he'd given me for weeks while measuring out poison. Before I could pretend to drink it, the door opened. Detective Martinez walked in first, followed by 2 uniformed officers and hospital security. The room temperature dropped 20 degrees in a single second. Carol Jennings," Martinez said, her voice flat and official. "I need you both to step into the hallway, please." Mark's face went white. Carol's smile froze, then cracked. They both looked at me, and for the first time, they saw something they hadn't expected. Not weakness, not gratitude, not the dying woman they'd been carefully cultivating. They saw Evelyn Parker, the woman who'd built an empire, the woman who survived. "What's going on?" Mark said. His voice was higher than normal, tight with something that might have been fear. "Hallway," Martinez repeated. "Now." They went. Carol kept looking back at me, her face twisted with confusion. Mark walked stiff and mechanical, like his legs had forgotten how to work. Security followed them out. The door closed. I sat alone in the hospital room, holding a thermos full of poison, listening to muffled voices in the hallway turn into raised voices, then into the sharp, metallic click of handcuffs snapping shut. Through the window, I watched them being led down the corridor. Carol was crying, loudly, dramatically, the same way she cried in church when the worship music got emotional. Mark wasn't looking at her. He was staring straight ahead, jaw clenched, silent. Neither of them looked back at me, not once. David Klein appeared in the doorway 20 minutes later. He wasn't alone. He'd brought my discharge papers, a black sedan waiting downstairs, and a plan that didn't involve me going home to the house I'd shared with a man who'd tried to kill me. "There's a suite reserved at the mansion on Turtle Creek," David said. "Secure, private. You'll stay there until we figure out next steps." I didn't argue. I gathered the few personal items I'd accumulated over weeks in this room. Jenna stopped by before I left, her eyes red, but her voice steady. "You saved my life," I said. She shook her head. "You saved your own life. I just handed you the note." We hugged, brief, fierce, the kind of embrace between two women who understand that sometimes survival is a collaborative effort. I left Baylor, Dallas, in David's black sedan, not Mark's SUV. I left with a folder full of evidence on my lap and Jenna's testimony on record. I left as a witness, not a victim. In the rearview mirror, I watched the hospital disappear. I thought about Mark sitting in an interrogation room, finally being asked the questions I should have asked months ago. I thought about Carol's Facebook followers learning the truth about their saint. I didn't feel victorious, not yet. Mostly I felt tired and angry, and something else I couldn't quite name. Maybe it was relief, maybe it was grief, maybe it was just the strange emptiness that comes when you realize the life you thought you had was never real to begin with. But I was alive, and that was more than they'd planned for me. The trial happened 4 months later in Dallas County Court. I sat in the front row every single day, dressed in clothes that fit my body again, strong enough to walk into that courtroom on my own 2 feet. The prosecutor laid it out methodically, every visit, every meal, every spike in my toxicology reports that coincided perfectly with family time, the financial records, the emails, the text messages, the insurance policies, the realtor inquiries. They'd built a timeline of premeditated murder disguised as devoted care, and they documented it themselves, too stupid or too arrogant to realize that Facebook posts and text messages create evidence trails, Jenna testified. She described the night she slipped me the note, her voice steady now, no longer shaking. She talked about watching my labs, about the moment she realized my symptoms didn't match any disease she'd ever seen, about choosing to risk her career because she couldn't watch me die. The defense tried to argue reasonable doubt, coincidence, misunderstanding. They suggested I was a demanding patient who turned vindictive when family tried to help. They painted Mark as a devoted husband overwhelmed by a sick wife. They made Carol into a concerned mother-in-law whose only crime was caring too much. The jury didn't buy it. You could see it in their faces. 12 people who'd watched the evidence pile up, who'd seen the text messages, who'd heard the expert testimony about ethylene glycol and sedatives, who understood exactly what kind of story they were witnessing. This wasn't one of those ambiguous Aita stories where everyone argues about who was wrong. This was attempted murder, plain, documented, undeniable. The verdict came back on a Wednesday afternoon, guilty on all counts, attempted murder, conspiracy, insurance fraud. The judge's voice was even and cold as he read out the charges, one after another, while Mark stared at the table and Carol sobbed into her hands. Mark turned once to look at me before they took him away. His face was empty, hollow. He looked like a man who still couldn't understand how this had happened, how his plan had failed, how the weak, dying woman he'd been feeding poison had become the person who sent him to prison. I didn't look away. I held his gaze until he dropped his eyes, until he understood, finally, that I'd won. Not because I was stronger or smarter or better, but because I'd refused to keep swallowing what they fed me. Sentencing came a month later. Mark got 22 years, Carol got 18. I wasn't in the courtroom for that part. I'd already given them enough of my life. I didn't need to watch them lose theirs. By then, I'd moved into a new condo in uptown Dallas, smaller than the house I'd shared with Mark. Simpler. Mine. I went back to work consulting for physical therapy practices. I had coffee with Jenna every few weeks. I started sleeping through the night without checking door locks or jumping at sounds. I learned to trust food again, slowly, carefully. I started cooking for myself, learning what I actually liked to eat, not what someone insisted I needed. I threw dinner parties with friends I chose, not people who came with my marriage. One afternoon, I sat at an outdoor cafe on McKinney Avenue, drinking coffee and watching people walk past. The sun was warm. The breeze smelled like summer. A server came by and asked if I needed anything else. "No, thank you," I said. "I'm good." And I meant it. For the first time in a long time, I actually meant it. I think about that note sometimes. The one Jenna slipped into my hand on a Tuesday night when my life was measured in IV drips and poisoned smoothies. "You're not sick. They're poisoning you." 7 words that saved my life. 7 words that gave me permission to stop trusting the people who were killing me with kindness. People ask me sometimes if I regret it, if I wish I'd handled it differently, if I miss Mark, if I think about Carol, if there's any part of me that wonders if maybe, somehow, they didn't really mean to hurt me. No, I don't wonder. I don't miss them. I don't regret anything except the weeks I spent thanking them for trying to murder me. This is one of those toxic family stories that ended exactly the way it should have, with the victim refusing to stay silent, with justice, with consequence. But more than that, it's a story about learning who to trust, about understanding that love isn't supposed to make you weaker, that care isn't supposed to come with poison, that sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones who kiss your forehead while measuring the dose. I survived because one nurse was brave enough to hand me the truth, because I was powerful enough to demand proof, because I stopped letting the wrong people feed me lies and called them love. If you believe that betrayal from family is still betrayal, no matter how pretty they package it, hit subscribe, share this story, because no one should have to wonder if the people at their bedside are praying or plotting. No one should have to survive their own family. My name is Evelyn Parker, and I'm finally, completely, absolutely healthy. Not because of what the doctors did, but because I learned to say no to anyone who feeds me pain and calls it love. Sometimes the poison isn't just in the cup, it's in the people you trust to hand it to you. And sometimes survival means learning to feed yourself.